Okay, the third key concept within Unit 5, or period 1750 to 1900, is nationalism, revolution, and reform. So the 18th century marked the beginning of an intense period of revolution and rebellion against existing governments. And then you also have the establishment of new nation states around the world. So this was influenced largely through Enlightenment thought and the resistance of colonized peoples to the imperial centers. And these rebellions sometimes resulted in the formation of new states and stimulated the development of new ideologies. And these new ideas, in turn, further stimulated the revolutionary and anti imperial tendencies of this period. So when one domino fell, several more would fall in influence. So the Enlightenment, you have the rise and the diffusion of Enlightenment thought that questioned established traditions, and it quite often preceded the revolutions and rebellions against existing governments because you have these new ways of thinking about things. So thinkers applied new ways of understanding the natural world to human relationships, and that encouraged observation and inference in all spheres of life. Major thinkers of this period included Voltaire and Rousseau, that government became a social contract between the governed and the governor. And if the social contract was not upheld, then the people had the right to overthrow the government. It was not all about absolute monarchs anymore. Intellectuals critiqued the role that religion played in public life and insisted on the importance of reason as opposed to revelation. So we're moving away from religion as the basis of rule, and now we're moving into reasoning. And that changes the way everybody saw things. Again, Voltaire, Diderot, John Locke, all of these are major thinkers during this period. The Enlightenment thinkers developed new political ideas about the individual, natural rights, social contract. So, again, social contract is between the governed and the governors. And it says that if the people are not happy with their existing government, they have the right to overthrow it until the social contract is upheld. John Locke believed in life, liberty, and property, that you have these rights and mankind is equal. And Montesquieu said that you needed to have the separation of powers. So you've got legislative, executive, judicial, all of those need to be separated from each other so that one does not become more powerful than the other. Now, three major revolutionary documents that you need to know, like absolutely all caps, like bold, underlined, everything, need to know. The Declaration of Independence. That was written in the United States of America by Thomas Jefferson. I really hope you guys know that by now. Um, but it's basically a breakup letter to Great Britain from the United States. And it says, we're tired of the way we are treated. We hold these truths to be self evident that all men are created equal and that they have these unalienable rights: life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. Highly influenced by the Enlightenment, specifically John Locke. The Declaration of Independence was highly influential towards the American Revolution, towards every major revolution in the world to come, too. Definitely an awesome Enlightenment document. Next, you have the Jamaica Letter, which was written in Jamaica, go figure, by Simon Bolivar. And Simon Bolivar wrote it because he was talking about the current status of Spanish colonies in Latin America. And he believed that they could not stay as they were and something had to change. And he looked towards the future. And Simon Bolivar is actually known for the revolutions that he helped lead in Latin America. And he saw a South American identity away from the Spanish. And that's largely what the Jamaica Letter is all about. Then in France, you have the Declaration of the Rights of Man, written by the National Assembly. And I mean, you see the same Enlightenment ideals portrayed throughout this. You've got men are born free, equal rights, uh, preserve the rights of man. No person shall be accused, arrested, imprisoned, except in the cases prescribed by law. So, I mean, you have all of these Enlightenment ideals also in the French Enlightenment revolutionary document. So, these ideas from the Enlightenment influence the resistance to political authority. and they influenced many people to challenge the existing notions of social relations, which then led to the expansion of rights as seen in expanded suffrage, or the right to vote, the abolition of slavery, and the end of serfdom. Beginning in the 18th century, people around the world developed a new sense of commonality, which was based on language, religion, social customs, and territory. It's often known as nationalism. These newly imagined national communities linked this identity with the borders of the state, while governments used this idea to unite a lot of different populations. So, increasing discontent with the imperial rule actually propelled reformist and revolutionary movements in some places. So, subjects challenged the centralized imperial governments, like, for example, the challenge of the Marathas to the Mughal sultans and the challenge of the Taipings to the Manchus of the Qing dynasty. Now, the Taiping Rebellion, that was a little bit religiously influenced, and we'll talk about that in just a little bit too. So, American colonial rebellions that are important to know would be the American Revolution, the Haitian Revolution, and the Latin American independence movements. First, we'll start off with the American Revolution. And just a fun little cartoon for you, real quick. Um, and I definitely know a few people that would agree with this cartoon 100%. So the American Revolution was highly influenced by the Enlightenment, obviously by the Declaration of Independence. Um, Now, the American colonies were set up by the British, and you have, prior to this, in about 1763, you've got the French and Indian War going on, and that was fought between the French and the Indians on one side, the British and the colonists on the other side, over territory. And the British had sent a lot of money and a lot of troops over to defend the borders of the colonies. Well, to pay for it, they made the colonists pay with the Stamp Act, and that was a tax placed on anything that had paper. The American colonists were not happy about that because they saw it as taxation without representation. They were not allowed to be represented in British Parliament because they were seen as a colony, not full British citizens. So they started to rebel. They said, we don't want to pay these taxes. We don't have the full rights of British citizens. Why are we doing this? So it ultimately came to a head, and the Declaration of Independence was written by Thomas Jefferson. The American Revolution was won by the Americans, obviously, and at the end they wrote the Constitution, which included the Bill of Rights, and that continued to push Enlightenment ideals about the rights of man and the rights of American citizens. And it is a wonderful document that definitely still is respected quite a bit. If you look at this map, you can see pre-war boundaries in 1775, and then you can see the post-war boundaries of 1783 at the end of the war, where you've got the actual United States now, and the rest of the continent that we will end up taking over, slowly but surely, to the Pacific Ocean. The Haitian Revolution. Now, this one, a lot of different things going on. So first off, Maroon societies. So within the colony of Saint Domingue, so it was a French colony. Within that colony, you have these Maroon societies as well. So Maroon societies just mean that they're filled with Maroons, and Maroons were Africans who had escaped from slavery in the Americas, and then they formed independent settlements. So Maroon societies were escaped slave settlements, basically. And part of their culture there, they practiced Vodun, which was a syncretic religion practiced in Haiti. And Vodun, or Voodoo, as commonly known as, they believe in a distant and unknowable supreme creator known as Bondi. And Bondi does not intercede in human affairs, so the practicers direct their worship towards spirits that are subservient to Bondi, called Iowa. And in order to navigate through daily life, the voodooists cultivate their personal relationships with the Iowa through the presentation of offerings, the creation of personal altars and devotional objects, and the participation in elaborate ceremonies of music, dance, and spiritual possession. So, I mean, that was the culture going on in Haiti at this point in time, or Saint Domingue. And it was a French colony from 1659 to 1804. Now, the Declaration of the Rights of Man and the Citizen was going on during the French Revolution, and the Haitians said, hey, even though it didn't revoke the institution of slavery, the slaves still took inspiration from its words because they lived in terrible conditions on the sugar plantations and life was just awful. So, you know what? They said, why can't we have equal rights too? So they were led by Toussaint L'Ouverture, and he was a military and political leader of these slave uprisings. So the slaves rose up against their leaders and they said they wanted their own country. So he was declared governor for life against Napoleon's wishes before the very end of the revolution. Unfortunately, he passed away and didn't get to see Haiti become its independent nation. But on January 1st, 1804, they did win their independence from France, the first successful slave uprising to create their own nation ever, which is absolutely incredible. Okay, Latin American revolutions. So the culture in Latin America at this point in time, pretty much all the Spanish colonies had the same caste system. So at your very bottom, you had your slaves, mostly Africans. Next step up, you got your Indians, the pure indigenous people. On your next level, you've got your mestizos, or your mulattoes, your mixed blood people. Next step up, you've got your Creoles, which are your colonial born white people. And then your top is your Peninsulares, who are your European born whites. A lot of people in the colonies weren't really happy with this social system and they wanted to upend it. Also, background information for you. At this point in time, just kind of like the Haitians had the French Revolution going on at the same time they had the Haitian Revolution going on, in the Latin American revolutions, you have the Peninsular War going on from 1807 to 1814. And that was Napoleon versus Spain, Britain, and Portugal for control of the Iberian Peninsula. So Spain, Britain, and Portugal were pretty distracted by this fight going on. A lot of people decided to take advantage of it, including Simón Bolívar. He was a Creole military and political leader, and he ended up leading successful rebellions in Venezuela and New Granada, Ecuador and Peru, the Republic of Bolivia, and Gran Colombia. He also wrote the Jamaica Letter, which we talked about before. Um, Also, the Monroe Doctrine from the Americans was absolutely helpful for Europe to stay out of Latin America. But unfortunately, the autocratic rule of the Spanish over the colonies, once the revolutions were won, quite frequently you were taken over by military landowners known as caudillos who had political power and they exercised it in authoritarian ways. So you go from one authoritarian power to another, unfortunately. But these caudillos lived on haciendas or estates known as plantations, mines, factories. They were basically large land holdings that allowed the caudillos to control their power. Also, at the same time, in Mexico, you've got the Grito de Dolores, which was the Cry of Dolores in 1810, which is seen as the beginning of the Mexican War of Independence, led by Miguel Hidalgo, who was a Roman Catholic priest. He also was killed, but the idea was there, and the Mexicans got their independence from Spain. Okay, totally different type of revolution now. We're going to move into the French Revolution. Now, it's different from the American revolutions because the American revolutions were all colonies rebelling against their mother country. The French Revolution is different because it's the French subjects rebelling against their monarchy. So, painting the picture for you, this is King Louis XVI. He was the leader of France, the king. He and his wife, Marie Antoinette, they ruled France. And I don't know if you can tell this from the portrait or not, but he liked to spend money. He lived a very lavish lifestyle. And that ended up causing him a lot of problems and ended up losing him his head. So the French Revolution happened 1789 to 1802 and strongly influenced by the Enlightenment and the American Revolution. King Louis called together the Estates General in 1789, and that was the assembly of the French estates. So your first estate was your clergy, your second estate was your nobility, and your third estate was your commoners. And they were called together to propose solutions for the government financial problems. Now, not only did Louis like to spend money personally, but the French government helped out the Americans in the American Revolution by sending money and troops. And that really turned the tide of the American Revolution towards the Americans winning. So the French government was broke. And unfortunately for the third estate, they were the ones that were paying all the taxes. So your third estate got very, very tired of paying all of the taxes, and the clergy getting tax breaks and the nobility getting tax breaks, even though they owned most of the land. So the Estates General happened in May and June of 1789. Didn't work. The third estate decided to form a national assembly, and they invited the other two estates to join them, which signaled the beginning of the French Revolution. This was followed by the storming of the Bastille. The Bastille was a political prison in the middle of Paris. And on July 14th, 1789, the French citizens decided to overthrow it. So they stormed it, and the political prison fell. And the fall was considered the flashpoint of the French Revolution. And July 14th is still celebrated as Bastille Day. Um, Following the storming of the Bastille, you have the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen written. And again, strongly influenced by Enlightenment ideals and it more about equality than anything else. And as you can see, that if the Third Estate wrote it, they definitely were tired of being treated as unequal compared to the rest of the French citizens. Following the storming of the Bastille, you have the Reign of Terror, which was a period of violence from September 1793 to July 1794. It was a conflict between rival political factions. They like to use the guillotine. There were mass executions of enemies of the revolution by the guillotine. It was seen as a very quick and efficient way to get rid of political dissidents. Um, Robespierre, that is one of the most influential figures that's associated with the Reign of Terror. He was placed on the Committee of Public Safety and helped lead a lot of these executions. He himself, unfortunately, was executed by the guillotine too because he went a little crazy. Uh, so this is a painting that you really should know in relation to the French Revolution. It's known as Liberty Leading the People by Delacroix. Uh, in the image, you can see Liberty as a female leading all of the common people. In the background, you can see the Bastille. And it is the uniting portrait of the revolution. So slave resistance challenged existing authorities within the Americas, as we already saw with the Haitian Revolution too. You've got the establishment of those maroon societies or those runaway slave societies, which that already was a bit of resistance anyways because they were runaways. You also have North American slave resistance, which ultimately led to the Civil War um, and the ending of slavery. But you do have a lot of slave resistance challenging existing authority because they said if the Enlightenment ideals can apply to you, why do they not apply to me as well? You have increasing questions about political authority and also growing nationalism, which contributed to anti colonial movements in certain areas. Like, for example, you've got the Indian Revolt of 1857 against the British, largely over cultural issues dealing with Hinduism and holiness and having to load guns, which is what you see in that cartoon. It was disrespectful because they were forced to touch unholy things. It just was not good, and they saw it as a largely cultural fight. You also have the Boxer Rebellion in Qing China, which the Boxers were opposed to foreign groups within China, like the spheres of influence. The Boxer Rebellion was ultimately put down, though, and you have the open door policy following it, so it backfired on them massively. Some rebellions were influenced by religious ideas, and millenarianism. Millenarianism is a Christian apocalyptic expectation that the second coming is very near and that there will be an establishment of a kingdom of God on earth. And that strongly influenced the Taiping Rebellion. Following that, you've got the ghost dance in America, and that was an attempt to revitalize traditional culture and to find a way to face increasing poverty, hunger, and disease, which were all representing the reservation life of Native Americans in the late 19th century. They created this new religion that promised an apocalypse that would destroy the earth and the white man, and then the earth would be restored to the Native Americans. Salvation of individuals could be achieved by purging oneself of the evil ways learned from the whites through ceremonial cleansing, meditation, prayer, chanting, and dancing the ghost dance, of course. And the last religious movement was the Cohosa cattle killing movement. in Africa. And this was from 1856 to 1857. Spirits told the Cahosa prophetess to destroy crops and to kill the cattle, and in return, the spirits would then sweep away the British settlers into the sea. And then after that, the Cahosa would be able to replenish the granaries and not suffer. It didn't work out so well for them, no. But you can see the strong influence of religious ideas in these specific rebellions. You also have responses to increasingly frequent rebellions that led to reforms in imperial policies, like the Tanzimat reforms in the Ottoman Empire and the self-strengthening movement in China, which I talk more about in the imperialism video. You've also got the global spread of European political and social thought and the increasing number of rebellions, which stimulated new transnational ideologies and solidarities. You got discontent with monarchist and imperial rule, which encouraged the development of political ideologies like liberalism, socialism, and communism. And women's suffrage. So, suffrage is the right to vote. Now, you see all these men fighting for these equal rights and everything, but nothing's ever said about women. And the women started to get a little annoyed about that. So they began to push for suffrage and equality. Unfortunately, their efforts really aren't like, they don't come to anything until the next era, but the foundation of that movement was really planted here. So in France, you have de Gauges, where she wrote the Declaration of the Rights of Women and Children. And it was written during the French Revolution, and she was pretty ticked that the French Revolution brought no rights for women. She dedicated the work to the most detested of women, Marie Antoinette. But unfortunately, as the revolution turned to terror, she pointed out the hypocrisy of the Jacobins, which wasn't a smart idea because she was imprisoned, tried, and then guillotined. Um, Mary Wollstonecraft in Britain, she wanted education for women. Her major work was the vindication of the rights of women, and it was one of the earliest feminist works, and she argued that women should have an education on par with men since women taught the children, which makes absolute sense. She stressed the equality of women to men only in certain fields, and she was tired of the fact that women were considered silly and superficial. The book was very well received, contrary to popular belief at the time. Elizabeth Cady Stanton, she was big on suffrage, and she wrote the Declaration of Sentiments at the Seneca Falls Convention. The Seneca Falls Convention was up in New York in 1848, and she really, really pushed for the women's right to vote. And this document was signed by 100 attendees of this conference, and it was based on the Declaration of Independence, but adding rights for women too. Frederick Douglass attended the same conference, and he said the Declaration was the grand movement attaining the rights of women. The convention was not very popular because not a lot of people supported the rights of women to get the right to vote. And unfortunately, women in America didn't get the right to vote nationally until 75 years later. But again, these women, their efforts and their work did not go unnoticed and ultimately built the foundation for women in the future.